As the fog-shrouded road twisted deeper into the Appalachian mountains, carrying me toward the remote village of Quiet Hollow and away from the suffocating grip of my shattered marriage, I felt an inexplicable chill seep through the cracks in my resolve, as if the ancient trees were watching my every turn. My name is Sawyer Thorne, a 35-year-old investigative journalist with a knack for debunking tall tales. I'd come here on assignment, chasing rumors of local folklore, ancient curses said to linger in these hills like stubborn nightmares. Skepticism was my armor. After the divorce from Hillary, whose controlling demands had left me feeling like a marionette in her endless performance, I craved autonomy and a fresh start far from the city's clamor. The isolation called to me, promising solitude and stories to unravel. But as my old sedan rattled over the uneven path, the mist thickened, blurring the line between escape and entrapment. Quiet Hollow emerged like a ghost from the haze, a cluster of decaying wooden houses hunched against the perpetual fog, their sagging roofs overgrown with moss that dripped like silent tears. Overgrown paths wound between them, choked with weeds that clawed at my boots as I stepped out, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. An abandoned mill loomed by the swollen river, its wheel frozen in rust, while the central tavern squatted in the village square, its faded sign creaking in the wind like a reluctant greeting. Beyond it all, the dense forest pressed in, a wall of twisted trees with branches intertwining like skeletal fingers, murmuring secrets to the shadows. The villagers I met that first afternoon seemed ordinary enough, faces weathered by hard lives, eyes meeting mine with guarded politeness. At the tavern, the gruff owner poured me a lukewarm ale without a word, his calloused hands steady, but his gaze flicking to the window as if expecting something unseen. Others shared fragments in idle chat, a shopkeeper mumbling about avoiding the paths after dusk, a farmer warning of faint sounds in the woods, like distant commands carried on the breeze. I nodded, jotting notes, dismissing it as rural superstition. I rented a creaky cabin on the village outskirts, a dilapidated structure with peeling wallpaper curling like dead skin from the walls, revealing patches of mold. The air hung thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, and the musty bed creaked ominously under my weight, its springs protesting like grinding bones. It was cheap, isolated, and perfect for my purposes, or so I told myself, ignoring how the corner shadows shifted when I wasn't looking. But that night, sleep evaded me. The fog muffled the world outside, yet a rhythmic thumping sounded from the forest depths, soft, insistent, like muffled footsteps circling in the dark, drawing closer each hour. I lay staring at the cracked ceiling, chill settling deeper into my bones, wondering if the mountains offered true freedom or just another cage. The next morning I shook off the unease and set to work, determined to bury the lingering dread from the previous night's sounds in the fog. I began interviewing residents, notepad in hand, probing for details on the folklore that had drawn me here. Tales of the unseen puppeteer, a force said to manipulate the living like dolls on strings, had circulated in obscure anthropological journals, but I needed first-hand accounts. Most were tight-lipped, their responses curt and evasive, eyes darting to the misty hills as if expecting judgment from the fog. But their behaviors nagged at me, subtle twitches disrupting the normal flow of conversation, like a shopkeeper's hand jerking mid-sentence while handing me change, his fingers spasming as if yanked by an invisible thread, or an old woman staring blankly into the fog before snapping back with a forced smile, her lips stretching too wide, too thin, revealing yellowed teeth that clicked unnaturally. It was as if unseen strings tugged at them, pulling them off balance and disrupting the rhythm of everyday life. I jotted notes furiously, attributing it to rural superstitions or a collective neurosis born from isolation. But a chill settled in my gut, a premonition I couldn't shake. That afternoon, while walking the overgrown path to the old mill, its rusted wheel half submerged in a sluggish stream choked with weeds, I saw it happen. The local baker, a burly man named Tom, with flour-dusted arms and a perpetual scowl, was crossing the street ahead of me, carrying a tray of loaves that smelled faintly of yeast and something sharp, like blood. Without warning, he collapsed, his body convulsing in grotesque spasms, arms flailing like a marionette in a frenzied dance, legs kicking in a deranged waltz. His tray clattered to the ground, bread scattering like offerings to the mist. His face contorted, eyes rolling back to show whites veined with red, and a low, guttural moan escaped his lips in sync with his unnatural jerks. Villagers gathered at a distance, murmuring about the dance, their voices a hushed chorus blending with the wind rustling through the trees. No one helped, they just watched, faces pale and impassive, as if this were a ritual too sacred or too terrifying to interrupt. I rushed over, my heart slamming against my ribs, fearing a seizure or poisoned water from the tainted streams feeding the village. Kneeling beside him, I checked for a pulse, my hands trembling as his skin felt clammy and feverish. But as I leaned in, he lurched upright with a crack like breaking twigs, staring through me with eyes vacant as glass marbles, devoid of recognition or humanity. A faint whisper escaped his slack mouth, not words, but a rhythmic hiss like wind through hollow reeds. I stumbled back, adrenaline flooding my veins, as the crowd's murmurs grew louder. Dismissing it as a medical oddity, perhaps epilepsy worsened by inbreeding in this isolated community, I retreated to my cabin, but the image haunted me. Sleep brought nightmares, strings attached to my limbs, thin and insidious, weaving through my flesh like veins. In the dream, Hilary's voice commanded me, cold and controlling as during our marriage, stripping away my will. "Dance for me," she whispered, and my body obeyed against my screams, jerking in helpless obedience until I woke drenched in sweat, the cabin's creaks sounding like mocking laughter. By dusk the following day, it escalated. The sun dipped behind the fog-veiled mountains, casting the village in a bruised twilight that thickened the air with oppressive weight. From my cabin window, its glass warped and streaked with grime, I watched figures in the square moving in synchronized jerks, their bodies twisting unnaturally under the fading light like puppets performing for an absent master. There were a dozen at first, villagers I'd seen earlier going about their routines, now transformed into grotesque performers. Their arms rose and fell in unison, legs buckling and straightening in a macabre rhythm that sent chills racing down my spine. Their eyes were voids, black pits absorbing the dim light, mouths slack and drooling as faint whispers rose from the ground, rhythmic like a heartbeat pulsing through the earth itself. The sound slithered into my ears, pulling at the edges of my sanity. One figure, a young woman in a faded dress, spun in place, her neck cracking audibly as her head lolled back, exposing a throat marked with faint, vein-like patterns under the skin. Panic clawed at me as I barricaded the door with the rickety table and chair, the wood groaning in protest. Paranoia gnawed deeper, a worm burrowing with each passing minute. My reflection in the glass revealed a man unraveling, eyes wild, hair disheveled, shadows carving hollows into my cheeks. Was this madness contagious? The whispers outside grew louder, seeping through the cracks, and though I pressed my hands to my ears, they resounded inside my skull, urging me to join the dance. Desperate for answers, I reached out to Marcus, the tavern owner, over whiskey-laced talks in the dim, smoke-filled room. Flickering lantern light and the scent of stale ale filled the air, with patrons huddled in corners, casting furtive glances. Marcus was a grizzled man, with a beard like tangled wire and eyes heavy with unspoken horrors. As the whiskey burned down my throat, he confided shaky warnings about a queen in the old mines, pulling threads through the earth. "She's down there, in the dark," he muttered, his voice a rasp, hands clutching his mug until his knuckles whitened. "Weaves her web into our bones, makes us dance to her tune." His stories painted vivid pictures of miners vanishing into the depths long ago, only to return changed, their movements no longer their own. Then, mid-sentence, his hands trembled, eyes glazing over. He jerked upright, as if yanked by strings from above. A low moan escaped him, and he staggered out the door, joining the dancers outside in their eerie symphony. I watched through the tavern's grimy window, horror rooting me in place, the whiskey turning sour in my stomach. Desperate, I pored over dusty books in the village library, a cramped room smelling of mildew, its shelves sagging under the weight of yellowed tomes. Candlelight flickered over crumbling pages, revealing tales of Mycora pupensis, a parasitic fungus unearthed in a 19th century mining collapse. The disaster had released ancient spores that invaded nerves, hijacking bodies like marionettes. Illustrations showed victims with fungal tendrils snaking through their veins, eyes hollow, limbs contorted in perpetual motion. The fungus formed a hive mind, centered on a queen node deep underground, spreading through soil and air to bind the infected in a collective dance. As I read, the library's silence pressed in, broken only by distant murmurs from the square. An itch started under my skin, along my arms, a subtle twinge that froze me, staring at my hands as if they belonged to someone else. It was faint at first, like a feather brushing my nerves, but it spread into a prickling heat, making my fingers twitch involuntarily. Was this it beginning? The thought sent ice through my veins. I scratched furiously, drawing blood, but the sensation only deepened, mocking my efforts. I banded with a group of protesters. Dr. June Hart, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with a guilt-ridden stare, haunted by her brother's fate. He'd been one of the first to dance, and she'd failed to save him, her medical knowledge useless against the unseen invader. Remy Voss, a fierce protector of the village orphans, her muscular frame clad in practical leathers, eyes burning with a mother's defiance. And Old Man Greer, a rambling hermit with a wild beard and clothes patched from scraps, muttering incessantly about the mine's curse, his tales laced with fragmented memories of screams resounding from the depths. We huddled in the tavern, the air thick with tension and fear sweat, theories swirling as dancers pounded at the doors. Their grotesque ballet was lit by moonlight filtering through cracks, shadows twisting on the walls like living entities. The whispers pulsed like heartbeats, vibrating through the floorboards, urging us to open the doors and join them. June dissected the fungus's biology from pilfered medical texts, her voice steady but her hands shaking. Remy sharpened makeshift weapons, her jaw set in grim determination. Greer paced, his rants a chaotic symphony that only heightened our dread. Suspicion flickered among us. Every twitch, every glance could be the first sign of infection. Venturing into the forest toward the mine, the air thickened with spores, a hazy veil that stung my eyes and coated my throat with a bitter, earthy taste. Trees loomed like sentinels, their branches twisted unnaturally, bark etched with vein-like patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light. Unnatural rhythms vibrated through the ground, syncing with my pulse and making my steps falter. The path narrowed, overgrown with fungi that pulsed softly, as if breathing. In the mine's depths, we found spore-filled caverns where glowing mycelium twisted like veins across the walls, illuminating jagged rocks slick with moisture. The air suffocated, heavy with rot, and a sweeter, almost floral scent that lured us deeper. Scattered journals, pages bloated with damp, told of an unseen queen. Miners scrawled accounts of a central mass, pulsing and alive, binding all to its will. One entry, marks smeared as if written in haste, described the queen as a colossal fungal heart, its tendrils extending like puppet strings through the earth, ensnaring souls. Then, the ambush. Infected hordes surged from the shadows, their bodies jerking toward us in a wave of contorted limbs and vacant stares. They moved as one, a synchronized nightmare, their whispers amplifying into a deafening chant. We fought back with flares scavenged from the tavern, flames hissing against the damp air, igniting spores and bursts of acrid smoke that made my eyes water. The infected clawed at us, nails ragged and fungal encrusted, their breaths rasping hisses. Remy screamed as a tendril scratched her, drawing a thin line across her arm that immediately veined with glowing filaments. She collapsed, convulsing, her fierce eyes pleading as the infection took hold. June's mercy kill haunted me, her blade steady while I trembled, plunging into Remy's chest with a wet thud, ending her suffering in a spray of blood that splattered the cavern floor. Guilt coiled like strings around my throat, tightening with each breath as Remy's body went limp, her final whisper joining the chorus. With this loss, we retreated once more to the tavern, barricades straining against the relentless pounding, the air thick with desperation and blood. I felt the infection deepen, twitches in my legs, spasms making me stumble, hallucinations flickering at my vision's edges, Hillary puppeteering me, her face superimposed over the Queen's imagined form, laughing as she pulled my strings. The itch had spread, a burning network under my skin, mapping my nerves like a web. Greer twitched too, his rants erratic, suspicion fracturing us like cracks in ice. His eyes glazed, and he lunged at June, accusing her of being one of them, his hands clawing at her throat. The struggle was brutal, furniture splintering as they grappled, June's knife flashing in the lantern light. She drove it into his side, but not before he bit her, drawing blood. In the end, she slit his throat, his body slumping with a gurgle, blood pooling on the floor. Now, just June and I remained, our alliance fragile, planning our descent once more with fungicides in hand, crude mixtures of bleach and herbs that burned our skin even as we clutched the vials. The itch spread further, my willpower fading like mist in sunlight, but I vowed to end it before I danced for the Queen. My limbs grew heavier, each movement a battle against an invisible pool, memories of Hilary's control blending with the fungus's insidious grip. Was this what she had done to me in our marriage, eroding my autonomy until I was just another puppet in her life? June noticed my twitches, her eyes narrowing, but she said nothing, her own guilt a mirror to mine. As we entered the suffocating tunnels, darkness swallowed us like a living thing, tendrils reaching from the walls like hands, brushing our skin with feather-like touches that promised oblivion. The air hummed with the Queen's pulse, vibrations shaking loose dirt from the ceiling, while shadows danced ahead, mimicking the villagers' grotesque ballet. Whispers filled my head, urging surrender, making me wonder if autonomy was just a fragile illusion, a thread easily severed. The tendrils thickened, glowing with inner light, coiling toward us as we pressed on, fungicides ready, shadows closing in. Deeper into the hive we ventured, the air thickening with sickly luminescence from the walls where tendrils pulsed like veins in a colossal heart. June's breaths came ragged beside me, her fungicide vial clutched like a talisman, but doubt shadowed her eyes. My own twitches had grown too frequent, too betraying. The whispers crescendoed into a roar inside my skull, the Queen's will slamming against mine, forcing visions of Hilary's face twisted into something fungal and ancient, her voice commanding me to yield, to dance eternally in the dark. Every step was a war, my legs jerking against my commands, but I pushed on, mining pick heavy in my grip. We found her at the cavern's core, a monstrous mass of writhing mycelium, embedded in the rock like a throbbing tumor, glowing with an otherworldly light. Tendrils lashed out, wrapping around June's ankle and yanking her toward it with a wet, tearing sound. She screamed, dousing it with fungicide that sizzled and smoked. But the Queen's influence surged into me then, seizing my nerves like strings pulled taut. My body convulsed, arms flailing in that grotesque waltz, the itch exploding into fire through my veins. Through the haze, I saw June fall, her body twisting into obedience as the infection claimed her fully, her eyes emptying, her final plea lost in a whispered hiss. Alone, rage and desperation fueled me. I fought the pull, severing tendrils with savage swings of the pick, each strike sending shocks of pain through my limbs as if I were cutting my own flesh. The Queen pulsed violently, visions flooding my mind, primordial depths disturbed by greedy miners, an entity awakened to enslave, stripping away free will just as Hillary had stripped mine. With a roar, I hurled the remaining fungicide into its core, the mixture erupting in a corrosive blaze. Tendrils recoiled, shrieking in my head, and I staggered to the explosives cache we'd spotted earlier, old dynamite from the mine's forgotten stores. Lighting the fuse with trembling hands, I fled as the cavern trembled, collapsing in a deafening roar that buried the Queen under tons of rock, severing her control like snapped strings. I clawed my way out, gasping into the night air, the forest's whispers silenced at last. Back in quiet hollow, the dancers collapsed mid-step, bodies crumbling to the ground, vacant eyes staring skyward in final release. The village became a graveyard of the enthralled, the fog lifting as if the mountains themselves exhaled in relief. I burned the bodies in a pyre that lit the square with hellish flames, acrid smoke choking the air, and torched the contaminated wells to prevent resurgence. But the losses clawed at me. Remy's pleading eyes, Greer's betrayed snarl, June's last scream, and my own body betrayed the incomplete victory. Twitches lingered in my fingers, a dormant itch under my skin. The fungus, not eradicated, but subdued, waiting like a shadow in my veins. Weeks later, I left that cursed hollow, the fog-shrouded road unwinding behind me as I drove back to civilization, forever scarred. The autonomy I'd sought in those misty mountains had been a cruel illusion, nature's unseen forces a mirror to the control I'd fled in my marriage. I published my article, disguising the horror as mere folklore, tales of whispers and dances to warn without inciting panic. But as I typed the final words in my city apartment, a familiar twitch seized my hand, jerking the keys into erratic rhythm. The chill returned, seeping through my resolve like the Appalachian mist, and I knew isolation was my only cage now. I've retreated to a remote cabin far from prying eyes, watching my limbs for the first sign of the dance returning, the rhythmic thumping sounding once more in the night, not from the woods, but from within.